Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Koshin West. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia. It is the 2nd of August of 2020. Uh, like I said, my name is Jeff Koshin West. My pronouns are he and him. Today we're getting together again for Integral Transformative Bodywork Sunday School, and our topic for today is altered states of consciousness, what we call ASCs. Altered states of consciousness and how they relate to, support, work with healing, as well as healing and recovery, as well as personal transformation or enlightenment. And so this is kind of a colorful topic. A lot of people get excited about this topic. And this kind of kicks off our journey in August. July of this year, the month we just left, July was a month of talking about the foundational practice of shadow work in ITB, all things or a bunch of stuff having to do with shadow work. And this month we're looking into altered states of consciousness, looking into shamanism and shamanic journeying and things having to do with the energetic world and how that has to do with all that material has to do with personal transformation, recovery, and enlightenment, and different things along those lines. Okay. So first and foremost, what we're going to do is we're going to start this conversation by talking about what the heck is an altered state of consciousness. So the term altered state of consciousness is an old term coming from the psychological world. Altered state of consciousness is associated with non-ordinary states of consciousness. So in the old school perspective of psychology, they talked about an ordinary state and a non-ordinary state. So that was their way of kind of identifying the beginnings of identifying a healthy mind and a not so healthy mind. So in the early years of psychology, there was this perspective that anything that was non-ordinary mind was a problem, usually related to some type of psychosis or some type of sickness of the mind. Ordinary mind was defined as what most of us kind of consider our normal day-to-day activity. Now, science has definitely had a lot of say-so about different altered states of consciousness and non-ordinary states. So nowadays, except for certain really kind of old school strict circles, and let's be honest, out of date and uninformed schools of psychology, most of the time the conversation of ordinary states and non-ordinary states being non-ordinary states being pathological is kind of out the window, because science has given us an understanding that altered states of consciousness, non-ordinary states of consciousness move around a fair bit. They're a little bit different. And today we're going to kind of talk about how to qualify these things and how different ways are kind of how this is talked about in different ways. So in the beginning, there was the ordinary states and the non-ordinary states as far as the psyche was concerned and the world of psychology was concerned. And if you had an ordinary mind or an ordinary state of consciousness, then you acted like a normal human being. If you were experiencing non-ordinary states, they would talk about having visions. They would talk about intense creative impulses, intense emotional sweeps. Most of the time, they were only looking at and defining this information in relationship to who they considered to be troubled minds. And so it kind of makes sense why they turned this into just a pathology type of a conversation. It's very problematic, as you can imagine, because if you are a religious person, or if you're a creative person, or if you are a person who is exploring the psyche, anything that doesn't look like ordinary mind or ordinary states, an ordinary state of consciousness, you're going to be in trouble. You could risk being locked up, and that did happen during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and actually there's cases into the mid 80s of people exhibiting non-ordinary states of consciousness, non-ordinary states of mind. And the psychological institutions being so out of date and being so rigid and structured and dogmatic that they would literally, that they actually did bring them into institutions, psychological health institutions, and cause a lot of trouble rather than cause a lot of help. So later on, as the years ticked by, a lot of this conversation of non-ordinary brain states started to, as just being pathological, really started to die off, because what science told us was that the human mind runs on different wavelengths. There's actually brain waves that go on in the human mind, and these brain waves have different qualities to them. You've probably heard of this. There's alpha, delta, theta, beta waves, different things along those lines. And these different types of waves kind of speak to different modes in which the brain is functioning and processing information about reality. So what came along, what kind of has evolved in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, has been this understanding that non-ordinary states non-ordinary states of consciousness, non-ordinary states of mind are not in and of themselves pathological, but they can be experienced by those who have pathology, psychopathology. Now, this is an extremely important kind of a breakthrough, because it means that we don't just diagnose and institutionalize anybody who experiences a non-ordinary state. So that's very, very important stuff. So we have very low occurrences of those things still happening now. I'm sure it still happens in certain spaces and different things along those lines, because there is definitely a lack of education in the psychological community and in the rest of the institutions having to do with non-ordinary states. But what we learned about them is that each one of these different wavelengths, different hertz, different types of energy that are running, brain waves that are happening for the brain. During these times, different portions of the brain seem to be more active. There's more things happening for the brain and for the human experience. That's another way of kind of talking about altered states of consciousness, and they all kind of interweave and kind of mesh over each other. So we've got so far ordinary states of mind, non-ordinary states of mind coming from the history and the lineage of the psychology world, and then starting to emerge more recently is this conversation of different hertz of brain waves when we measure the brain, and as it moves into these non-ordinary states of consciousness or altered states of consciousness, then we start to see these different wavelengths occurring, different activity occurring, and none of those are fundamentally pathological in any way. They're natural phases of the brain and of the mind and of the human experience. Another way that we're going to talk about them, a fair bit, is having to do with some very, very, very old technology, very, very old information coming from primarily the East, and the investigation of the mind having to do with Tibetan Buddhism and different schools of Buddhist thought, and the Eastern traditions in general when they investigated the minds, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Zen, different things along those lines. A lot of those old religions in the East. And we're going to talk about three different kinds. It can be split into four, and you can split them up into even more. In Tibetan Buddhism, they split them into even more. But we're going to talk about three to four basic ones, and those are called gross, subtle, and causal. And these primarily I'm bringing up because they're very helpful in understanding. The human experience when it comes to especially personal transformation. And so the gross, subtle, and causal realms or states of consciousness, like I said, primarily come from a lot of Eastern traditions, and they have to do with different ways of perceiving reality and different things along those lines. Gross does not mean as in like icky or gross or unpleasant. Gross has to do with the gross body, the gross realm, having to do with material things. So gross, if that word throws you off, it's a little bit more of a technical term for that, having to do with the physical realm, physical experience, and physical items in specific. Subtle in that conversation has to do with anything having to do with movement of the mind, and causal has to do with anything beyond the mind, be deeper than the mind type of an experience. And we'll jump into these a lot more specifically as we go forwards. But we're going to talk about altered states of consciousness, and instead of saying altered states of consciousness over and over and over again, we refer to altered states of consciousness as ASC. So ASC or ASCs, when you hear me say that, I'm saying altered states of consciousness. So once we kind of lay some groundwork of these guys, we're then going to go ahead and jump into how they help with recovery and healing, recovery, and personal transformation. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here with you with this cute little picture I made. All right, so here we go. We've got altered states of consciousness. For altered states of consciousness, we talk about at the top here, we got states of consciousness. So we're going to start with our first line here, and the gross realm. So the gross realm has to do with the physical experience of reality. It has to do with the physical world in general. A state of consciousness having to do with the physical realm is states of consciousness that are very body bound. Another way of talking about this would be physical sensations. So the physical sensations experience is a very powerful one. It is very, very foundational to our human experience because it is bound to the physical world. So the gross realm is having to do with physical sensations and that area where physical sensations are connecting to our stress response, connecting to some of our emotions, and that's kind of the overlay that kind of occurs there, the kind of the interconnection that can happen between the gross realm and the subtle realm, because a lot of physical sensations can also be very much connected to some of our really, really basic emotional conditions. So none of these, in talking about this upper portion here, nothing here is going to be, nothing here is standing on its own. All right, so everything here is going to be kind of overlapping into the other, and the causal is very much going to be overlapping into the other, as we'll soon find out. So the gross realm is very much about the physical realm. Gross states of consciousness have very much to do with physical sensations of different types, and how those physical sensations and the most basic rudimentary emotions also have a very, very, very physical binding that are going to be going along with them. So once again, these are not rigid categories. These are not deeply compartmentalized. They're actually very much overlapping each other. And we just want to kind of hold these with some general ideals. When it comes to the brainwaves conversation, when it comes to that conversation, gross realm experiences, gross realm sensations are going to be very, very much really basic, ordinary states of mind experiences. They're going to be relatively normal for us. They're not going to be very extreme. They're not going to be very much of a surprise. But those gross realms are relatively accessible to all of us as we go through our first several years of life. They're usually not all that complex, but they can at times be a little bit more complex. But in general, the gross realm has to do, or the gross states of consciousness, ASCs having to do with the gross realm have to do with physical sensations of possible euphoria, physical sensations having to do with pleasurable physical sensations, experiences, different things along those lines. So the gross realm is really, really strongly bound to different types of physical sensations that are very potent. Possible, certain types of sexual impulses and different things along those lines, sexual experiences, as well as uncomfortable experiences, the experiences of deep discomfort or deep loss or deep agitation. Deep physical sensations that are pleasant and unpleasant are very much going to be linked to that gross realm. Scooching on over to the subtle realm. And the reason, let me actually say this real quick. The reason this line is relatively short is because the spectrum of the experience is actually pretty small. If we're just talking about physical sensations and some of the beginnings of crossing over into more complex emotions, really rudimentary basic emotions and physical sensations of this realm, that's not very complex. That's relatively simple stuff, and it's not very hard to navigate for us at our current state of stage of evolution in humanity and on this planet right now. So this gross realm is relatively basic stuff for all of us, okay? So it's relatively small. It's not all that deep. It's not all that thick, and that's why the line is represents that way. So when we scooch on down to what's called subtle here, subtle states of consciousness, subtle mind or subtle experiences are actually where the majority of us live on a regular basis. The subtle realm or subtle states of consciousness have to do with all the plays of the mind. All right, so included in the play of the mind is not only basic emotions, but also extremely complex emotions, very deep, very rich, very interwoven emotional experiences. Also within the subtle realm is the world of creativity, the world of thought, the world of concepts, the world of belief, the world of ideas and imagination. So in the subtle realm, we have a whole lot of different types of flavors of things arising here. If we were to talk about something having to do with spirituality or the spiritual world or the religious world, subtle realm spirituality or subtle realm religion, this is where we're very much going to be seeing our relationship to um, profound spiritual breakthroughs, especially emotional ones or conceptual ones or mind-based ones. We're also going to see the projection of deities, gods, angels, a lot of the things that are considered the esoteric or mystical sides of religions and spiritual traditions. These are all going to be subtle realm oriented things. So if there's any play of the mind, it kind of feels like this is, for a lot of folks, when we first kind of bump into this, it feels like this realm is just so expansive. It is it's the end thing. It's the biggest thing you could possibly be doing. But the subtle realm is actually limited, because it's a play of the mind, the play of a lot of the other components of the human psyche. So in the subtle realm, we do have that intermeshing with the gross realm, which is low emotional experiences, low emotional sensations and feelings and emotions, starting to spread into more complex ones. So as we move from the subtle realm and we go into more complexity, we have more emotions that are showing themselves, more qualities emotions, more interwoven emotions, more complex emotions, deeper emotions, brighter emotions, bigger emotions, however you want to phrase those. And then we start to see the reality of here in the subtle realm, we'll start to see creativity. We'll see, we also include creativity. We also include ideas, imagination, beliefs, philosophies, conceptualizations, concepts, perceptions, plays of the mind, different things along those lines having to do with anything in the world. And then we also have here in this realm having to do with gods, deities, chakras, very personal experiences of chakras and different things along those lines, different energy movements in the body. Those also intermesh with the gross realm experience. And we see different types of very, very intense, beautiful kind of spiritual experiences of interaction and of that are based off of conceptual experiences or beliefs or the experience of a deity or a higher power or something along those lines. So in this realm of the subtle realm is what most of us consider the spiritual religious experience or the human experience. Most of us identify our humanity as the subtle realm expressing itself. All right. So we think of, I am my emotions, I am my ideas, I am my concepts, I am my thoughts and philosophies and beliefs, I am the visions I have. I am the connection. I define myself by my connection experience of my higher power and deities and power animals and experience of higher power and experiences of transcendent religious and transcendent spiritual experiences. We define ourselves on this spectrum of subtle and cause and gross because those are the things that are extremely tangible and that we can touch and that we can talk about and we can have an experience of. And to go back to some of that old conversation, to some of that old language of ordinary and non-ordinary states, ordinary states, what used to be considered ordinary states, show up on the gross realm. Ordinary states show up in the subtle realm. You can have ordinary states in this subtle realm and in this, in this gross realm. You can also have non-ordinary states, what used to be categorized as non-ordinary states, through the gross realm and through the subtle realm. Kind of a conversation of the gross realm, we do see some of the sensations that come with energetic play. If you've done any kind of energy medicine or energetic practices, a lot of the movement of energy through your body or feeling of energy moving in your system or building, or any kind of energy play that you might do or energy honing that you might do. A lot of the sensations of that are gross realm based. That's the energy of the gross realm. It's happening. It's kind of like that intermeshing of the crossover between an energetic and a physical space. And we have this experience in the gross realm. So gross realm spirituality or gross realm transcendent experience, a gross realm type of a powerful spiritual or religious experience would be the sensation of bliss, the sensation of awakening, the sensation of insight. We see this in every tradition around the world. Having to do with a spiritual religious experience, they all talk about a certain gross realm euphoric experience that occurs. Now that definitely can be combined with some of this subtle stuff, but as I said in the beginning of this conversation, these are not exclusive of each other, okay? These guys are all kind of overlaying each other, and as we move down to this Wilber-Combs lattice, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're going to hold off for a second on that. So we do see gross realm spirituality having to do with very, very powerful physical sensations. And those don't have to be pleasant. Sometimes they can be very painful. Sometimes they can be this really intense absence of any sensation. And that can be very powerful. We can also have these, these subtle realm experiences having to do with spirituality, subtle realm experiences having to do with the experience of being face to face with a god, or having connection with our power animal, or going on a shamanic journey and having experiences and emotional sensations and processes as we go on that shamanic journey or whatever. Or we may be doing a lot of meditation and yoga, and we have a different powerful breakthrough that comes through in these different types of subtle realm things. And so gross and subtle realm is where most of us live. It's where most actual spirituality lives. In fact, in the New Age community, and the New Age or the spiritual, not religious community, a major component of their spirituality is subtle realm. It's got some gross realm stuff going on because they get pretty excited about the chakra system and Kundalini and different types of energy movement within the body. But a lot of it is subtle realm based because it's about their emotional experience with a higher power. And so part of a lot of what spirituality we see that's come from, you have a religious or a meditative practice or an energetic practice that comes from the East and then hits, Europe and North America, or the U.S. and hits the Western Europe and the Americas, the North American continent, and you get all these kind of interesting translations of things. And as that's happened, we get very interesting kind of shifts and changes along the way of how we perceive these things. And of course, just like is the case with speaking with any community or sharing any information with any community, we will latch on to certain things. So as that information came from the East and started landing in Western cultures, what we started to see was those Western cultures kind of latched onto things that were meaningful to them. And one of the things that definitely happened here in the States in the 60s, 70s, kind of in the 80s, and then definitely 90s and aughts, into the early 21st century, was the reality of these New Age concepts, the reality of enlightenment and personal transformation and the human potential concept. With that community, what we bump into is we have then a ton of subtle realm type of stuff happening. It's almost to the point of an overindulgence in the subtle realm, having to do with if I'm having an emotional experience of my higher power or of things that I deem spiritual, that's what my goal is. I'm looking for a gross experience of it, a pleasant experience of it, or a high or a euphoria from doing this chant, or I'm looking for this really deep emotional, mental peace and calmness coming from doing this chant in the subtle realm, or doing these yoga positions, or singing, or reading these scriptures, or breathing or meditating in a certain way, or focusing my mind on a certain axiom or something along those lines. And so a lot of this is New Age spiritual harvesting of this subtle realm. And I'm not pointing this out because it's bad. I'm pointing this out because that's what's gone on. Now, it can go wrong. It's something called, and when it does go wrong, it's something called spiritual materialism. And spiritual materialism has to do with kind of the obsession with the subtle realm. And so what the obsession, or what spiritual materialism starts to look at, so we'll have this word as we go forwards, what spiritual materialism starts to look like is a person that's constantly in pursuit of the next high of a spiritual kind, or the next technique to take them to a different high, or the next practice that takes them to a good experience and positive experience. In spiritual materialism, what happens is that there's an overindulgence of the subtle realm. And then when we overly indulge in the subtle realm, what we start to notice is that we get wrapped up in the getting high, the pleasant experience of it. We confuse personal transformation or enlightenment. We confuse my growth for feeling good. Usually because we just haven't had good teachers in our world, and usually because we haven't listened to some of the education that is out there about personal transformation. Because if we listened a little bit harder, if we had a good teacher, what we would learn is that the personal transformation process, enlightenment, deep awareness, and connecting with your with the formless, with the ground of being, connecting with your higher power, it's supposed to be empty. There's not supposed to be a pleasant physical sensation or an unpleasant physical sensation. There's not supposed to be a pleasant emotion or an unpleasant emotion. All those things are available there. There's not just supposed to be one or the other. All things are supposed to be there, but there's also supposed to be a recognition that you are more than those things, that your awareness, your deepest nature is more than that. And if we pay attention to what is laid down in a lot of scripture, what especially the most refined components of spiritual practice, what they're pointing to through every tradition, what they're pointing to is not the grasping of gross realm qualities or subtle realm qualities, but the allowing them to be, and identifying and experiencing of something more. And so at this point in time, it's perfect to move into the causal conversation, because the question of, well, oftentimes comes up, well, is in this conversation is, well, if I'm not the gross realm needs to be kind of honored, but also, let go of. And the subtle realm is to be honored and honed and, of course, let go of or not identified with. Then what should I actually identify as? What's actually the true nature of myself? And so at this point in time, we bump into what's called the causal realm. The causal realm, I have illustrated it here. I did not mess up when I was doing this. But the causal realm, the reason I presented this as one big, thick, big black line is because I wanted to kind of create this this image that the subtle realm and the gross realm all live on top of or within the gross, or within the gross and subtle realm all live in and on top of or a part of the causal realm. In fact, the term causal was a translation from, I can't remember the translator, the scholar, but it was a translation of a English-speaking scholar of some of those, I believe it was from the Hindu conversation of states of consciousness. And the translation, the translator called it the causal realm because the teacher, the Hindu teacher that he was working with, said it is the cause of all things. So that translator said the causal realm is the cause of all things. And so let's kind of pull apart this concept a little bit. The causal realm is a realm that's gotten a whole lot of different names throughout history. Literally, God is one of the names of the causal realm. When we look at Catholic, Christian, into Judaism, and basically the Abrahamic traditions, the Abrahamic religions, including Islam, the term for God the term that when God is described, where it is described by not always the major text, but as far as some of the deeper scripture is concerned, and definitely deeper practitioners, what they've written about. God is represented as this space in which there is nothing and everything. There is just this wide open territory. It's constant, it's unending. It hasn't begun or has never ended. It's this territory and it's this place where it gives birth to all things. Everything arises there. It's oftentimes described as being deeply, deeply silent, deeply, deeply still. And there is just this openness, just this emptiness, this nothingness, this territory. And this is oftentimes, and it's very contradictory usually, especially in a lot of the translations of English and into the West. It's like this empty fullness, okay, or this full emptiness. There's nothing there and everything is there. And so it's kind of an annoying type of a thing to talk about if you're not really into esoteric, mystical conversation. But curiously enough, it shows up in every personal human investigation process that we call a spirituality or religion or a mindfulness tradition. It shows up freaking everywhere, including into a lot of the shamanic traditions. There's no shortage of terms and phrases for the causal realm that show up in a lot of the shamanic traditions. So it is the place in which all things kind of burgeon out. I come from a lot of my Northern Native American teachers are Lakota in origin and teach Lakota tradition, and the causal realm is oftentimes talked about as great mystery. And it is the place where things just occur, where all things come from and all things return to. And so this is why we have it, or this is why I represent it this way. It's also, I got this from the integral community, this concept from the integral community. And so the causal realm is the cause of all things. If you want to put it in a little bit of a different phraseology from spiritual traditions, we can think of it, I oftentimes talk about this as the palette, or not the palette, it is the canvas in which the painting emerges. So the canvas of our human experience is the causal realm. It is the awareness that is here. So we are, to use a metaphor here, humans are like paintings, humans are like creations, humans are like works of art in progress. So on the canvas, any painting can emerge. And for every human being, the canvas is the same, but sometimes the canvases are a little bit larger. Sometimes canvases are a little smaller. Sometimes there's different types of canvases all over the place, but there's still a canvas in which a painting emerges. All right, so this kind of metaphor, analogy kind of speaks to what the causal realm is about. And to take this a little bit farther, the subtle realm is the subtle realm for the painting is the ideas, the experiences that were put into it, but then also elicited from the painting or from the image. And the gross realm is having to do with the actual physical paints themselves and the actual strokes and activity of the painting. So if you consider states of consciousness and the human experience conversation as looking at a painting, well, the gross realm experiences are equivalent to the strokes, the practice that the artist went through, the types of paint, the chemistry of it. That's the gross realm manifestation of this metaphor. It's the paint strokes, it's the paint brush, it's the techniques used. It's the substances being used. In the subtle realm, it's the ideas, it's the concepts that the painting is trying to talk about, but also part of the subtle realm is what the painting and what the painting is trying to elicit out of others, and what it does elicit out of that is, and that it's not trying to do. And then the causal realm would be the would be the canvas itself. Okay, so the canvas itself is kind of impartial to what's being painted. So it's just there to hold the paint. It's just there to express whatever artist is showing up on it, right? And so this is a really kind of a sweet metaphor for these different gross, subtle, causal realms. And in the causal realm, this is the cause of all things. It's the place where everything arises. And for us, another way of, in ITB, a lot of times what we talk about is we use the terminology from other great traditions. And so the causal realm we often talk about is having to do with awareness. The ground of the human experience is this awareness present to this physical body. It is present to the mind. It is present to the sensations. It is present to this human experience occurring. And it's the place in which that human experience, it's the territory in which the human experience is arising. And so the causal realm is what many traditions point to, as well as what we point to in integral transformative bodywork. The causal realm is our quote unquote truest identity. It's the self with behind, it's the capital S self behind everything. It is the thing that wants to be realized. It is the thing that wants to be understood. It is the thing that oftentimes our human need to grow, or our human need to understand reality. That's what's hoping to be understood, is that I am awareness. Every human being is awareness. It's the same awareness that is arising, just showing up in a different physical human body, thus expressing in a different way. So what we notice about different altered states of consciousness, or these different states of consciousness that we point out, is that all of them are valuable in certain ways. All of them have merit. All of them can be helpful. And it in the personal transformation and in the recovery world, it's kind of important for us to kind of get an understanding of these guys and understand what that's about. Now, when it comes to altered states of consciousness having to do with non-ordinary experiences, now, interestingly enough, within the subtle realm, you will see, and within the gross and subtle realm, actually with each one of these realms, the gross, subtle, and causal realm, there can be kind of splittings of those different types of hertz, the alpha, delta, theta, beta waves that come up. And we can kind of break those up into different experiences. And I really don't want to get too bogged down with that. But what I do want to say is that if we go to that old school idea of ordinary brain states and non-ordinary states of consciousness, as well as non-ordinary states of consciousness, each one of these kind of speaks to non-ordinary states of consciousness and ordinary states of consciousness. So what's important to know about this, non-ordinary states is the equivalent to altered states of consciousness. What's important to know about this is that in that dangerous territory of work within subtle realm and gross realm and causal realm, primarily subtle and gross, that dangerous territory of spiritual materialism, what comes to be a problem is people get really they basically turn into junkies, to use the term from Jumpo Dennis Kelly. He talks about subtle realm junkies. And the subtle realm junkies are essentially, as I talked about before, the spiritual materialists that want to get high off of a new experience on a regular basis. They want to breathe enough to have a high experience, to have some type of, expansive, out of their minds, quote unquote, out of their mind experience. They want to have a hallucinogen, or quote unquote, a narcotic. They want to exercise to the point of transcendent experience or altered state of consciousness. They want to have sex to the point of altered state of consciousness. They want to pray to the point of altered state of consciousness. They want to meditate or do some activity to the point of altered state of consciousness. And that is, technically, that's fine. But if one misidentifies those altered states of consciousness as enlightenment, or misinterprets them as the goal, that I'm meaning like I'm supposed to be in a non-ordinary state all the time, this is going to be a spiritual materialism. These are confusions that go along with it. So let's clean this up a little bit. What we hope for, what has come through the ages from several different traditions, is that the deepest experiences of enlightenment, the deepest awakenedness we can have, is a present moment awakenedness, is a deep identification, deep experience and presence of awareness, to where we are And in that experience of that awareness, a extremely intimate and direct contact with what is arising in the present moment. And that doesn't mean we're rejecting our history or rejecting projections into the future. What it does mean is that all those things are included, and they are included in this present moment experience. It's not one or the other or either or something along those lines. Or I'm sorry, one or the other. It's having to do with the reality of, it is the experiences of the deep awakenedness of being present in the moment along with those other things and those things being around. And this is not me being high. This is not me being stoned. This is not me being, my mind blown or something along those lines. This is actually the evidence from these deep wisdom traditions, is that it's a deep present moment experience, and it is going to elicit a certain type of an experience, and it may feel very intense. It may not feel, especially when you're first kind of touching it. But when you're in the process, there is an experience of deep emptiness, and there's a lack of sick attachment to anything that's going to be arising. So when you're experiencing that, there's stuff that arises and goes away. And in the beginning experience of that stuff, there is oftentimes an excitement that can go along with it. But it's also, unfortunately, because some of us have been trained to identify pleasant emotional experiences or pleasant physical sensations with enlightenment or with awakening, we misinterpret the emptiness, the silence and stillness of awakened mind as not being of anything important. And so it's kind of a comical play of errors, if you will. A lot of people will do deep meditation stuff, and as they're doing their really intense meditation retreats, they're expecting to have these huge breakthroughs and these powerful personal experiences of emotions or sensations or concepts or insights. And those are very, very valuable. But those are still gross and subtle realm experiences. What we've noticed about the causal realm is that when you have an experience of that ever-present awareness, what we notice is that there's not much of anything going on. There's just this wicked expanse. And the first couple times you make contact with that wicked expanse, maybe it feels really good. Maybe it feels really bad. Maybe it doesn't feel like much. But what we notice is that as people work with that great expansiveness, that as they continue to meditate and visit that or experience that on a regular basis, what occurs for them is the realization that it's not that big of a deal. It's an ordinary, it's kind of like what Buddha talked about and what has been passed down in Zen and Buddhism, which is its ordinary mind. It's ordinary mind is the way. It's just the way, it's just there's nothing flashy, there's nothing dramatic, there's nothing even all that special about the experience, other than the fact that it's the most raw awake that you will definitely be, and that it changes the brain so much and it changes the human experience so much. So it's in this realm, what the reason there's a dropping away of physical sensation and emotions as being so important is because we're allowing the gross realm and subtle realm to just kind of be. And we're not trying to be the subtle realm or gross realm material. We're just allowing ourselves to be aware, just allowing ourselves to be awake, just allowing ourselves to witness and experience. And even the dropping away of the witness occurs if we're truly in causal experiences, where there's just raw awareness occurring. All right. And the more we kind of do our meditation practice, and specifically it appears sitting meditation seems to be the thing that's one of the best ways of doing this. But as we're just sitting, just kind of having that experience, what we notice is that it definitely is drastically different than some of the grasping mind that occurs in the subtle realm and the gross realm. So when it comes to altered states of consciousness, what we really want to be, what we want to bring attention to is we got to be careful of that major pitfall here in the subtle realm of becoming subtle realm junkies, because it's real easy to become subtle realm junkie. I spent a long time being a subtle realm junkie. I was very, very, very interested in those, getting high on gross realm experiences that overlap with subtle realm experiences. The next the next cool breathwork practice, the next cool chant, the next, energy medicine technique that got me high or got me feeling good, got me feeling in a specific, quote unquote, in a specific way that I consider to be spiritual sensation. Or connection with my experience and my higher power experience. That was constantly my investment of pursuing the subtle realm in that way and trying to feel that way on a regular basis. And so what I noticed along the way by doing more and more study and by listening to my teachers, what I noticed along the way was that I was very, very much attached to feeling a certain way in relationship to spirituality. I insisted that if I was spiritual, I should feel a certain way. If I was experiencing a spiritual process or if I was a spiritual person, I should feel a certain way. I should have specific sensations. I should have only specific thoughts. And this is a very, 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 very rigid way of thinking about spirituality. And it is an attachment and kind of like a sickness within the subtle realm experience. It is a sickness within the New Age experience, within this New Age spiritual but not religious community. So we got to be really, really careful with that. And that's really dangerous stuff, and we want to avoid that. So these altered states of consciousness, ways of moving into altered states of consciousness. So aside from just the sickness conversation of it, that's a general overview of the gross, subtle, and causal realms. Our truest identity that we want to kind of bank on and invest in is the causal realm, is the causal experience, this causal state of awareness, these causal states that occur. And the causal realm is kind of interesting because it's different than, what we've noticed is kind of different than gross states and subtle states. Causal states is both kind of a state and our original condition. So it's a little bit different than what's going on in the gross state and subtle state, because the causal kind of is like light. That's both a wave and a particle. So causal is both a condition as well as a state. Okay, it's something that we can definitely get a powerful brain experience with, and there is brain waves that go along with it, oftentimes extremely subtle ones. But it's also what we've noticed through witnessing and through scientific investigation of mindfulness is that it's the common condition of everyone. Okay, it's the basic investigation, or it's the basic, it's the 0 point for everybody. Before the 1s and 2s and 10s and 50 millions arise in the subtle and gross realm experiences, we are all that causal state. We are all that causal condition. So it's both something that we can kind of, as we put down gross and subtle, it's something that we can have a brain state experience of. But the more you do that, the more you put down that subtle, the more you put down the gross, and the more you start to have these experiences of the causal state, the causal condition, the more you start to notice it is your actual 0 point. It's your beginning point. You start as, we are all causal, we are all 0. And then as I need to perform a certain activity, subtle will kick in, gross will kick in. There will be more of an attachment and more of a use of the gross and subtle realms. And so that's just natural human condition, that's natural human experience. And if we start to have conversations about how people kind of blow these open and start working with these guys and experiment with these guys, this is where altered states of consciousness and the practices of altered states of consciousness really start to show their value. So as I said before, none of these are wrong, none of these are bad, none of these are problematic. They're just like any other element of the human experience. The gross realm can be good and it can be bad. There can be sickness there and there can be health there. Subtle realm, there can be health there and there can be sickness there. Causal realm, there can be sickness there and there can be health there. So when we talk about these guys, what we want to keep in mind is that they're all kind of a part of the human experience, and they're not fundamentally good or bad. They just kind of are there, okay? There are healthy experiences and expressions of them, and there are sicknesses that occur in all these guys. Altered states of consciousness is when we move from an ordinary awareness to a more expansive, strange awareness. Maybe I shouldn't say strange, but a normal type of a functional mind, to where we see alpha, delta, theta, beta wave states start to change out, and we start to see new experiences coming up. So what we notice is that there's specific ways to get into altered states of consciousness. Altered states of consciousness has been the pursuit of every spiritual and religious tradition. They are common to us human beings. They are normal. They also are common in a lot of other creatures on this planet. And so they're not abnormal. They're very normal. They're very typical. They're a part of our nervous system. And as we'll touch on later, they're actually very important to our integration. So an ASC, different types of ASCs, or how we go into ASCs, different ways of going into an ASC, is things like breath work, things like exercise or breathing, things like they can be reached through physical activities like sex or exercise, dance, different things along those lines. They can occur through the repetition of phrases or sounds, so that can be intoning or singing or chanting or praying out loud. They can just be, it also can be prayer internally or chant internally that can cause that repetitive activity can cause a brain state shift, and you can move into an altered state from these things. Altered states can come from specific meditation practices of all kinds. So they can kind of come up from many different things. Another more popular one these days can come from substances. So whether that be, you know, mushrooms or weed or licking a frog or intense pain experiences or different types of narcotics, heroin, opiums, different things along those lines. All these allow for change of brain state, which puts us into an altered state of consciousness. So all these things are considered ASCs. And since all these things are considered ASCs, they have the potential of doing the healing work of ASCs. They have the potential of doing what an ASC is, what we think is supposed to do, which is push our consciousness outwards, push our awareness in a way that it's not been pushed before. That being said, this is where things start to get exciting, and this is where we start to push into that territory of ASCs and their help as far as working with healing and recovery, as well as personal transformation. So let's talk about the personal transformation one first, because that can be kind of exciting. So for personal transformation, and this also helps us look at what's down here, the Wilber-Combs lattice. What we start to see here, Wilber-Combs, this is Ken Wilber and Alan Combs. Ken Wilber does what he does with integral. Alan Combs did a fair bit of research having to do with how each one of these states actually has different manifestation based off of your personal transformation, about your stage of development. So really quickly, just to unpack some of this stuff, causal and non-dual. Remember, we only talked about 3 here. Causal and non-dual are pretty similar. So I lumped in just causal here. I didn't point out non-dual. Non-dual is kind of like something that, depending on the tradition you're talking about, but we can make this statement this is relatively accurate of a statement. Causal and non-dual are just kind of different subtleties within, you know, non-dual is just a different subtlety, a different quality within the causal realm. So oftentimes you'll see Ken just talking about these 3. Other times you'll hear him pushing causal and talking about non-dual. And in other spiritual traditions, religious traditions, we're talking about primarily Tibetan Buddhism and certain Vedic Hindu traditions, Kashmir Shaivism and different things like that. You're going to see this conversation of, even within non-dual, they will split it up. And so for us, and for what Ken did in the integral movement, he kind of kept it to 3 or 4, and that's usually how he presented it, and I'm only keeping it to the 3. But you can have these 4 forms. In Tibetan Buddhism, I believe they call them kayas or bodies. Or it's kaya or kalpas. I can't remember right now what the word is, but they're considered bodies or veils or systems. And so each one of these is going to have a different body to it. So there's a gross realm body, there's a subtle body, there's a formless body, and then there's a non-dual body. And though even those get broken down into different forms and stuff like that. So shit gets wicked complex as you go into Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhism. They just went crazy with this stuff and made beautiful maps, but it's way more complex than we really need at this point in time as an intro type of an experience. Anyhow, so what we're seeing here, so that's why you'll see the causal and non-dual stuff. And so what we're looking at here with Wilber-Combs lattice and what it means for personal transformation is that if you've learned anything, if you looked at integral theory, if you know a little bit about integral theory, every one of us goes through stages of development. And this is similar to looking at stages of a plant life, or stages of physiological shifting that happens within every creature on this planet. So no oak tree just bursts into reality as being an oak tree. It starts from a seed, then turns into a sprout, then turns into a sapling, and goes through a couple other stages of physiological development as it makes its way towards a quote-unquote adult-bodied oak tree. Same thing happens for human beings. Same thing happens for pretty much every living creature on the planet. It goes through phases or stages of transformation. And what we've noticed is that along with some of those physical transformations or stages of development, there are also conscious stages of development. There's different value systems, different perspectives that come online, deeper awarenesses that can occur, deeper understandings and deeper seeings that can come online as we humans evolve, and as a culture evolves, as an individual or as in a group evolves. And so there is a direct component, there is a direct correlate between different unfolding phases of physiology in human beings and what the human being psychologically can manage and perceive and experience and unpack. So for every stage of physiological change, there is roughly a stage of personal development that occurs. Now, since in human beings, most of us finish the physiological changes, the general physiological maturation by our early mid-20s, it used to be thought that these stages of development basically finish in your 20s and in your early to mid-20s. So whoever you are in your in your mid-20s, by the time that physiological change ends, whoever you are at that point in time, you're always going to be. That's an old school type of a perspective. It's clearly not true. We've shown this over and over and over again that it's not true. And what we noticed here is, as we look vertically, is this vertical line right here is this different stages of development that is primarily, this is based off the work of another gentleman by the name of Don Beck, who what is the medicine carrier, the carrier of the lineage of Clare Graves. And so this is basically mapped out how human beings go through stages of maturation of care and concern and ability to process information. So right around the, the mythic to rational, you're going to get the mythic to rational. You're going to see this emerge at a certain age. And this is usually around, late elementary school to early middle school. So what that translates to is 5th, 6th, 7th grade. You'll see more and more rational orientation showing up. Rational stage of development really anchors into early high school, but then you'll also start to see in early high school this emergence of pluralistic perspectives, meaning you can take multiple perspectives, you are interested in fairness. So each one of these kind of emerges along the way. And most of the US culture right now is living somewhere around here. Okay, we have the general population and culture of the US is sitting right around rational, pluralistic type of stuff. Now we do have some subcultures that are very problematic, having to do with those lower stages of development, but we definitely do, the general population is kind of living in this type of a territory here. And so what the Wilber-Combs lattice is attempting to do after that long spiel on stage development, what the Wilber-Combs lattice is trying to let us know is that depending on what stage of development you're at, you will have a different experience of the gross state, subtle state, causal state, and non-dual state. So this usually speaks to spirituality, and this is oftentimes talked about in spirituality in the context of a spiritual orientation. So at the rational stage of development, they are very focused on medicine and science and that which can be quantified. Very typical rational perspective. Thoughts and feelings sometimes are left out of the model of reality because they can't be quantified. Because they can't be measured, they can't be managed. Not they can't be managed, that they can't be quantified, can't be qualified, can't be added and subtracted, and different things along things along those lines. So in some people say, well, as far as the rational folks are concerned, they're oftentimes identified as atheists or agnostics, usually atheists, and they're very focused on what science can prove and disproves and different things along those lines. And folks say, well, do atheists have spiritual orientation? And the spiritual orientation, like a subtle realm spiritual orientation for the rational stage of development, an atheist may have a spiritual orientation that has nothing to do with deities, but very much feels compelled by momentums of care and concern of a greater good, if they are studying AI and consciousness, they're talking about maybe a certain materialism having to do with that. And so you may see their spirituality manifesting not as a conversation of God or a conversation of, different types of perceptions of maybe stories from old-timey religions or ancient religions or shamanic traditions. Their conversation of spirituality is going to have to do with great care, great ethics, interconnectivity, supporting other human beings, finding what is true and right, and different things along those lines. They may have some different views around those things, but that can be a very powerful spiritual tradition for them. Their experience of causal and non-dual, if they do have spiritual or if they do explore these territories, would be something along the lines of a character like a Sam Harris. Okay, if you're looking for a representation of that, Sam Harris is a known meditator. He wrote a book called Waking Up. This is also Neil deGrasse Tyson as far as he's shown symptoms. These are characters who are looking at the causal and non-dual realm, and primarily causal realm, as like the human experience is this profound thing that we just can't put our finger on. We can't quite quantify it. We can't quite qualify it. There's something happening inside of. There's a greater storyline. They may identify experiencing a pulse of evolutionary momentum inside of them. They are on the side of evolution. They want to contribute to evolution. They want to offer up and support information having to do with the unfolding of human beings, or making the world a better place for human beings. So if this is rooted in a deep, deep love and a deep sense of openness, and that they want to understand awareness, this can be their spirituality as far as that's concerned. And so when we look at a person who's in that rational stage of development, they still have a spirituality. They still have access to these gross, subtle, causal, non-dual experiences. Those are still acting in their experience, and they're still going to dip into these causal, non-dual experiences, because every time we go to sleep at night, we pass through these phases of consciousness as well. So when we go from our waking state, if we go back up to gross, subtle, causal, we're awake laying in bed, right? We feel the room, we feel the cool air or the warmth, we feel our blankets, we feel our body laying on the mattress. Soon enough, something changes as far as our mind is concerned, and maybe we start having some dreams. Maybe there's some emotions, maybe there's some play there, maybe there's some lights or some colors and different things along those lines that we notice. Maybe we have a full-on dream or nightmare. And if we go beyond the dream and the nightmare, we also may notice when you're asleep at night, we also may notice that there's this place of just nothingness. There's just nothing there. It's just dark, but you're aware of the dark. You have an experience of this emptiness, of this just expansive nothingness, right? There's just nothing there. And that's the causal realm. So every time we go from laying in bed, waiting to fall asleep, to falling into dreamland, into something deeper, this is a movement from the gross to the causal and a return. We then come to return. We then wake up. We go from this deep dreamless sleep, and we may start to have some emotion or different emotions or thoughts or colors coming through and lights coming through. And then we pop back up into the world, and we're like, oh, there's my alarm, usually woken up by a gross realm experience. Lately, it's been my dog hopping on the bed because she's got to go to the bathroom, but it can be an alarm. It can be you're too hot, or you're too cold, or the covers aren't right, or something waking you up, or you're hungry, you have to pee. And so basic gross realm starts to come back around again, and we stay up for our day if we do. And then at the end of the evening, if we're following a normal pattern, we go back through that cycle again, hopefully hitting causal, and then come back on out. And so everybody's going to have these guys, everybody's going to have access to these experiences, and they're going to manifest in different ways. Now, if I am a rationalist, if I am at this stage of development of the rational, if I am taught meditation and I'm taught it through a scientific lens, then 100% I can have all these experiences going on with causal and non-dual. They're not lost to me. It's just how I translate them will be a little bit different than some of these earlier stages and some of these higher stages. So a person that's like a Sam Harris, or like a person who's very sciencey in their orientation and looks through a scientific lens strictly, they may say, well, these are great and all that jazz, and these are basically just a part of this meat bag experience, and they're just different brain states that occur, and there's nothing all that special about them. They will probably be allergic to the term spiritual. They will not identify them as being sacred. They'll not identify them as being spiritual. They'll not identify them as being something of that nature. They will most likely identify that they are important to the physiology and the functionality of the body and the efficiency of the mind-body experience. But most likely they won't call them much of anything else, okay? If we were to jump up, or let's not go up, let's go down, right? So if we go just before that, what we get in the mythic realm is we get a lot of traditional rules and roles and religious oriented stuff. And so this is a great example, a good example of this is the typical Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish experience of spirituality and religion. So their gross realm experience may be reading the books, reading the scriptures, maybe having to go to church or going to mosque or going to temple, maybe physical sensations that they may have when they go through those experiences. As they do that, they may play with concepts and ideas and consider the ethical, moral orientations of those things. Maybe they explore other qualities having to do with this stuff. So they have a tendency to explore the mind, explore the emotions, explore those sensations, and a lot of sensations and emotions, they will identify those as spiritual. And they will point to, you know, my mythical experience of my religion is that I can feel God. I can feel the presence of God around me. I can talk to Christ, or I can talk to Buddha. I can talk to deities. I can have those experiences. I relate to my power animal type things. And they live within a specific format. From mythic on downwards, you're going to have some pretty powerful constructs having to do with religion and spiritual orientations and the mythologies and stories of those spiritual and physical, those spiritual activities and those religious activities. As we look at something in the causal realm experience with a mythic person, this could be a Catholic, a Baptist, a Muslim, a Jew that has had a very powerful emptiness experience or union with God experience, union with whatever term they want to use for their God, union with the ultimate experience here. And at this point, it may just be a blissed out. If they have a powerful, if a person from the mythic stage of development has a powerful non-dual experience, it will most likely feel like a real blankness, and it may actually be really confusing for a lot of them. There may be pleasant experiences that come from this. It may also just be this empty territory that they have. So the point here is what we're trying to point to is that as we go through stages of development, moving up, and if we move upwards to pluralistic and integral, we'll start to see different types of, you will still have the states of experience present because every human being has them. As Ken likes to say, states are free. Everybody has access to them no matter what. You could be a horrible, you could be a psychotic killer, and you could be a murderer or a horrible a person that has performed incredible cruelties to other human beings or other things, and you can still have these transcendent experiences. In fact, a lot of horrible people, a lot of tyrants and warlords, Hitler, Mussolini, different types of warlords like this. I would imagine even Trump at this point in time has had very powerful spiritual experiences, subtle and causal experiences that probably motivate them in a whole lot of ways. And so if you are anybody from the mythic realm, anybody that would we could consider as being a very cruel human being, or maybe a very narcissistic human being, a very psychopathic human being, you can still have these powerful transcendent experiences. I mean, just look at some of the data on a lot of our serial killers. A lot of them have a lot of damage, and they pop into these altered states. They pop into subtle and causal non-dual states pretty often, these non-ordinary states, and that can be a motivator. You know, they can, for mythic and magic and going into the old world of these things, of these experiences, these can manifest as hallucinations. The subtle realm can manifest as, the subtle realm can manifest as hallucinations, or physical sensations of having a demon in your body, or feeling demons around you, or feeling energetic beings, or feeling spirits or angels, or energetic representations from your religion or spiritual orientation. You can feel them in your physical environment. The mind is at play here. So in the subtle realm, you can have really powerful experiences. So a person from this territory could say, you know, I can feel a demon in you, or I can feel the demons around me, or I'm having a sensation or emotion of demons in this environment. And they can be 100% honest. They're being as clean and clear and curious as they know how to be, but it's a warped perception because they're an early stage of development, and they probably don't have, and they're probably locked in these territories and these superstitions. And so there can be definitely sicknesses that go on as far as this is concerned, and misinterpretations based off of what education level. This is one of the things that the rational stage of development did wonderfully, was it exposed that, yeah, there really isn't, what we consider demons is not really what demons are. There's no real material quality of demons whatsoever. That these are manifestations of the mind mostly. The pluralistic stage of development, if we leave the atheists alone for a bit and start moving into the pluralistic stage of development, what we'll start to see is the pluralistic stage of development gets really high in the subtle realm and the gross realm based off of physical sensations and emotions. They usually have a spiritual or religious orientation. They have oftentimes will have a moral code, and it's very, very inclusive. It also includes that rational stage of development that says, yes, there's things that are quantified, and science very much has its place, and we realize that there is also things that, all due respect to science just can't be accountable to. And that just living a rational life doesn't allow for the rest of our humanity to show up. And that's one thing that some rational sickness has a real problem with, is that it can oftentimes just reduce every human experience to not that important. And so there can be a big existential crisis that occurs here in these stages of development. And the pluralistic self is very interested in that existential experience of, what is my meaning? What is my value? How am I going to show up in the world? How am I going to take care of those who have been subjugated, or who have been repressed, or something along those lines, and they want freedom and liberation and fairness all around. And this stage of development may get very high. And in the US, we have a lot of issues with this green stage, the pluralistic stage of development, the green stage of development. They are definitely junkies of the subtle realm oftentimes, because they want to feel good, because it felt so shitty coming from here. So they really want to feel good in this territory, and they can sometimes get very attached. They can become junkies as far as that's concerned. Also in the subtle realm, also in the pluralistic world, the beautiful thing that can happen is that if they explore into the causal and into the non-dual area, this is just more expansive. And so the cool thing that the Wilber-Combs lattice tells us about as far as personal transformation is concerned, it kind of gives us this kind of growth experience of, like, if I'm mythic, I can definitely have all these stages of development. If I'm kind of like a strict Christian or a strict Catholic, I can have these experiences, but they're not going to be as profound as if I were to evolve and aid and mature in my personal transformation, in my stage development, as what a pluralistic or integral person is going to experience. A person at those stages of development are going to experience as far as that vividness is concerned. What we notice is that the capacity of the nervous system is a little bit less down here, okay? The capacity of what's okay, because oftentimes there's a lot of rigidity here. I keep on hitting the damn button. Because there's a lot of rigidity down here. There's a lot of what's okay and what's not okay in these early stages of development. We still see it in the rational stage a fair bit. but there's a lot of like okay and what's not okay. And the farther we go up into pluralistic, the more we start to see a lot of flexibility about what's okay. There's a lot more ethical flexibility, a lot more ethical and perspective flexibility and inclusivity and degrees of understanding and discernment that's going on. And so as we go up through those vertical stages of development, we get more and more discernment, especially around that pluralistic, that high rational pluralistic place. We get a lot more room for discernment and inclusivity. And so it usually creates a bigger opportunity for us to have these experiences of the causal and non-dual, because you may have a hard time doing them down here. They may not be available to you. So for personal transformation, this is a really, really sweet kind of a map of, if I'm doing my meditation, it's good to do, you know, finding out where I'm at as far as this stage of development is concerned is really great. And also it behooves us from an integral perspective to include all these different states as part of our spiritual practice. So we don't want to suggest what the Wilber-Combs lattice is not suggesting is that you should be aiming for this up here, the highest, fullest, broadest type of experience. That could maybe be like a seriously back burner type of an intention. That may be like the overarching goal of your, you know, 70 to 90 years on the planet. But really your primary responsibility is that the integral map really wants us to point out, and that Ken Wilber has said several times, is if you can, as you learn about these stages of development, wherever you are, usually human beings live in about at least 2, maybe 3 different realms of stages. Wherever you are with this, if you're doing something called a spiritual practice or a personal transformation practice, it's a reminder that you need to include gross practices. You need to include subtle practices. You need to include causal and non-dual practices. So instead of, the hiccup that some people bump into is maybe they're at the pluralistic stage of development and they're really invested, like I said before, they're subtle realm junkies. They're just really interested in the next cool chant, the next cool meditation, the next great retreat, the next ayahuasca retreat or mushroom retreat or peyote retreat. And they're just interested in getting altered state experiences. And they're neglecting the causal stability of meditation that maybe a Zazen meditation could provide, or a Tibetan. They're missing these 2 components. They're leaving them out because maybe they don't fit the category of spirituality that they think. So this kind of reminds us of this. It also reminds us that we also see this a lot in the pluralistic stage of development, where they forget to care for their body. They believe they are a spirit inhabiting a human body, and that they're a spirit having a human experience. And this can be a permission or a rationalization towards, I don't have to really care for my body as much because I'm a spirit. I'm a spiritual person. That's what I am, a spirit. That's what I am. So this physical body, I mean, it doesn't really matter to me that much. Or this physical realm, the gross world, doesn't really matter to me all that much. So whatever, I'll do what I want. And so they sometimes leave out the reality of the physical body and how important the physical body is in the personal transformation or spiritual orientation process, all right, or the recovery and health process. So this map, one of the things this map kind of is attempting to remind us of is that we have to include these different components of the map in order to make sure that we are actually doing an integral type of a practice, because an integral type of a practice is going to make sure that we get to the destinations when we want to. And so if I'm living at a rational stage and I honor the reality of this personal transformation process, I don't have to pick up a spirituality or religion as I go up. But what I do have to do, I am charged with increasing my care and concern and being more inclusive about people's beliefs and perceptions and responsibilities and fairness. So you can really get some very exciting stuff starting to happen as we start to age on through, as we start to kind of grow on up through these stages of development. One of the defining factors of this stage of development is what we call, and we borrow this from integral theory, we talk about the circle of care. Who is in your circle of care? And the higher up you go through these stages of development, the larger your circle of care is, which means the larger you make decisions based off of those that are farther away from you. So you include, when you're making decisions about how you are going to do life and what you're going to do with your world, you include not only yourself, not only the people that are within arm's reach, not only the people that are in your community that you identify with, but also people that are you'll never meet in your life, you'll never connect with in your life, that are so far out of your circles that they're considered strangers or even enemies. You include them in your circle of care and how you make those decisions and how you care for their needs and care for their fulfillment. So if you're a human being that's measuring your actions by, is this a caring and nurturing and loving thing to do for my quote unquote enemies or a past enemy? That's a deep care and concern. That's a much more philosophical and ethical orientation. And that's a very powerful position to be. And that's usually, and that is one of the defining factors of how we point to stages of development. And so as we kind of go up through those stages, we do see just a different orientation of how we live and inhabit in this gross realm, subtle realm, causal realm, and non-dual realm. And so we want to include those as we go. So no matter where you are on this stage development map, we just want to make sure we're keeping these different states, bringing them along for the ride and not putting all our eggs in one basket, so to speak. So this is how the Wilber-Combs in different states can help with altered states can help with personal transformation. And once again, altered states of consciousness, if we are doing breath work, doing meditation, doing type of prayer, chant stuff, doing hallucinogens of any kind or substances of any kind to change brain states, what happens is we go from ordinary state, ordinary mind, and we start to push into realms that we just can't normally occupy because of whatever reason. Because of constructs in our culture, because I had no idea they existed, or I just don't have the practices and skills to kind of go to those places. So you can have a rational, mythic human being. Let's just stick with a rational human being, a scientific, very gross world, gross realm. The world is what I can weigh as far as substances and gross is concerned. And my mind is the most important thing about my humanity. I'm defined by my mind here in this area. This can be a very typical rational self, and you give them ayahuasca, you give them peyote, you give them mushrooms, you give them, put them in a meditative retreat for 7 to 14 days, and they're going to start seriously pushing into these subtle realm, causal realm experiences and having very mind expansive, very awareness expanding processes and experiences. And that may reveal to them the potentiality of the human experience and not of the mind, because the causal realm is kind of beyond the mind. It is underneath the foundation of awareness and the other foundation of the mind. And so they may start to get an insight of that high, subtle, into causal, non-dual experiences. So state training, altered states of consciousness, can be wonderful kind of like, if we're really living in this territory here between, gross and subtle realm on the rational stage of development, having that mushroom, licking that frog, having that ayahuasca could really, boom, push you into high, subtle, causal, non-dual states, which could be huge for you, which could give you whole new insights through your scientific lens. This actually is a very typical process in different think tanks around the world. Is the engineers, the engineers, the mathematicians, the physicists, they get together and they do whatever substance they're doing, ayahuasca, peyote, mushrooms, licking frogs, whatever the substance is that they're exploring. And they burst into that new territory of that high, subtle, causal, non-dual experience. And they go through it and they bring their science practices and their science projects to it, and their projects in the field. And because it has such a profound awareness expanding experience, they oftentimes get huge insights and beautiful awarenesses that surface. So it's one of those things where this is a reality that people participate in. It doesn't make them spiritual, and oftentimes they don't have a spiritual orientation in it, but they can use those experiences to definitely serve what they're doing in the gross realm and the day-to-day world and support their mind. So this is what altered states can be very, very powerful for when it comes to these transformational experiences and creating transcendent experiences. And that goes for the pluralistic population, the mythic population, the magic, all these stages of development. Oftentimes altered states of consciousness will push them into the territory they just can't quite go into for some reason or another. And the hope is that in the personal transformation experience, the hope is that you push into that altered state of consciousness to verify that it's real. And the more you push into that altered state of consciousness, the more you burn a pathway in your nervous system. We call these neural pathways. And this is literally a pathway in which that nervous system experience of being on mushrooms or ayahuasca or whatever your substance is, or breath work or sex or exercise or prayer or whatever, you burn that neural pathway enough to where you don't even need that substance anymore. And you can just kind of venture into that altered state. And that altered state, the beauty of the altered state, the love, the compassion, the unity, the interconnectedness, the openness, whatever value, whatever gold you kind of get from those altered states, you can then start to bring back into your normal world. You can start stabilizing in your normal world. So if you're a pluralistic, at a pluralistic stage of development, you do this altered state practice, and it gives you a sense of intense unity and connectivity and incredible amounts of compassion and love and nurturing for all things that are arising. You can start to bring that experience home to when you're taking care of your kids, to when you're doing your helping work, to when you're interacting at the grocery store, to when you're interacting with people who are high stress and in danger or something along those lines, and who may be aggravated with you. So we want to bring back whatever gold we find in those really intense altered state experiences. We want to bring that gold back so we can start to stabilize it in our normal, ordinary brain state experiences on a regular basis. And from a transcendent or an altered, from a personal transformation or enlightenment or a spiritual perspective, that's really what we're interested in. We're really interested in pointing to gathering the gold from those altered state experiences and trying to stabilize them and have that gold and live that gold in our day-to-day lives. That's where a lot of that lands. When it comes to, since we've covered a lot of ground here, so that's really awesome. And a lot of this is actually going to support where we're going as far as the next phase of this conversation, which is how do altered states of consciousness support recovery and healing. Altered states of consciousness are very exciting when it comes to recovery and healing, because a lot of the things that happen to us that cause trauma occur very strongly in the gross and subtle realm. Trauma very much lives in the gross and subtle realm. That's the territory that it really, really sticks around in. The causal realm, curiously enough, from my experience of it, as well as working with other people, in the causal realm, trauma, those things of the subtle realm and the gross realm are not all that important. They still carry value. They're still worthy, but they're worthy like everything else is worthy. So when we start to move into that causal realm, when we start to have that experience of being in causal realm and start to stabilize causal realm experiences and really start to recognize that we are awareness, we're not a subtle mind activity or a gross body experience or gross mind experience. When we start to really understand that we are awareness, the relationship to the gross and subtle trauma, it really starts to transform, really starts to turn into something else, a different type of relationship altogether. And that's primarily because that gross and subtle trauma is trying to inform us about something. That trauma, that gross and subtle trauma, is trying to get integrated into the gross and subtle realms pretty intensely. And so with altered states of consciousness and ITB, when we're starting to do altered state of consciousness work with people, we find that altered states of consciousness really create an opportunity for us to take control off of. We start to open up our contraction in relationship to the trauma. And when we go into our altered states, or when we have altered state experiences, the contraction around the trauma starts to loosen a little bit, which means the material of the trauma will start to be had. So they'll start to process more of that experience. They'll start to feel some of it. There'll be echoes of it. It's not the actual thing. We're not re-traumatizing the person. It's having the echoes, leftovers, the remnants. Now, those remnants can be intense. Those echoes can be startling, but this is not re-traumatizing. This is not just digging up old wounds for the sake of digging up old wounds. This is taking the leftover material that was supposed to get integrated in the process. This is creating an opportunity for those wounds to finally get integrated. What we find, and this is really based off of a lot of work by Peter Levine in the somatic experiencing world, is that we human beings have really sophisticated brains, and we have a sophisticated brain that can repress information and withhold information and withhold experiences and stimuli for very, very long periods of time, to our detriment, of course, but it can definitely do it. So usually in the animal world, in the world most people call the animal world, these other creatures on the planet, their nervous systems allow for oftentimes a normal integration of trauma that occurs for them. Us human beings have this situation where we've gotten so good at repressing and suppressing things that we've created a hiccup in the integration process. So instead of, after a traumatic experience, actually being supported and taken through the integration process to full circle and coming back to, and that information coming back to our brain and coming back into a full integration of the experience, what we have is we have a hiccup and we have a fragmentation that occurs. And when that happens, what we find is altered states of consciousness open a window, if you will, for that hiccup, for that split off to continue the process of reintegrating. And we find it is because of, altered states are the key in this situation, because we find the most basic, simple practices of creating an altered state in creatures on this planet, including human beings, is that of breathing. So when we see animals go through their recovery of trauma, they will have a very specific brain pattern. They will usually be still for a period of time, have a very specific breathing pattern, not brain pattern, breathing pattern. They will go into an altered state. They'll sometimes twitch and shift. They oftentimes have their eyes closed. So it's rapid breathing for a certain period of time. This creates a cyclic type of a reintegration of the trauma. Now, we don't oftentimes create that opportunity for human beings. So the usual thing that we do is we support people going through an altered state experience by focusing on their breath, by focusing on their sensory data experiences and their emotions and their process. And by moving into those altered states during body work and including body work with breath work, we open up this window where there's this breath work happening, there's this touch that's happening, there's this data arising, and we open up this window for the natural integration process to come home. And it's usually through that vehicle of altered states of consciousness. And so we use breath work specifically to take folks through that, or take folks into that altered state experience and walk them through that process for integration. But anything that creates altered states of consciousness can allow for that trauma integration to occur. So when it comes to health and recovery, altered states of consciousness play a key role in actually opening up a window for the nervous system to shift enough for the natural integration process that's been pointed out by Peter Levine and somatic experiencing to actually occur. And so that's kind of how we contribute altered states of consciousness to healing and recovery. Now, this is not common knowledge. This is not commonplace. This is actually within a certain realm of information right now in the medical community. It is getting more and more research. It is getting more and more attention. In fact, it's not so much through breath work. The primary vehicle of getting attention of altered states is through mushrooms and marijuana. So right now there's been, at this point in time, there's been tons of studies and very, very positive studies that have shown that use of mushrooms or different types of hallucinogens like ayahuasca or different things along those lines, those types of chemistry, those types of chemicals move us into such an altered state of consciousness to where it can actually cause integration to occur. And it can have an effect on trauma that creates anxiety issues, trauma that creates depression issues, trauma that creates maybe pathological manifestations, obsessive disorders, different things along those lines. So what we're noticing is that altered states of consciousness allow for integration. Now, they're using mushrooms. You don't have to just use mushrooms. Dr. Stanislav Grof has been studying breathwork, as is considered one of the pioneers of breathwork, and he has come to the same conclusion about breathwork for the same damn reasons. So the idea is that in ITB, what we put forth is that if you're going to focus on health and recovery, if you come to us as ITB practitioners for health and recovery, the idea will be educating you and coaching you into altered states of consciousness through body work and through breath to create an opportunity for you to move into that altered state of consciousness while receiving touch and or movement in a safe territory and at your own pace for you to have that integration process. We don't use mushrooms, we don't use ayahuasca, we don't use substances as far as that's concerned, primarily because that's usually out of control at that point in time. You put a substance in of any kind, you're riding the roller coaster, okay? But if we use breath work, I mean, you're the one breathing. We're not breathing for you. You're the one breathing. So if you're doing breath work and it starts to get intense, you just change your breath a little bit, you collect yourself, and then you make a conscious choice to either go forwards and push into it more, or you take a rest for that session. So it very much goes into your own control. With breath work, there's a lot more control that we can exert onto the situation. And so altered states of consciousness are key components of recovery for human beings and key components for the integration of trauma. It has, as far as my assessment is concerned, it is wicked clear that if you leave out altered states of consciousness from any kind of recovery model, the recovery model is painstakingly, woefully underrepresenting itself. It's going to be a real slow, rigorous, probably unfulfilling, unworthy process. So altered states of consciousness, from where I'm sitting and from our perspective in ITB, altered states of consciousness are mandatory for full recovery and for recovery from trauma. So that's kind of where we stand as far as altered states of consciousness in relationship to trauma and recovery and personal transformation. Thank you very much for joining me for this time. Please submit any kind of questions you might have through our YouTube page, or our YouTube channel, I should say. Also, if you have questions about this, or if you want to talk more about this, or if you want more guidance on this, please reach out to us at embodyingitb.org. You can reach us there. You can also reach out to us directly via email, embodyingitb@gmail.com. You can write an email directly to us and we'll hopefully respond to it. And not hopefully, we will respond to your emails. The other reality is that if you want to explore this more and you want more consulting, more direct education on these things, the best route to take is head on over to embodyingitb.org and look for our coaching. Our online coaching at this point in time. The coaching is, coaching is the term we use, but it's really education and consultation. It's really kind of support and guiding you through the process, guiding you through the experiences. We can support you in moving into altered states. We can educate you on altered states. We can educate you on how those things look and how they feel and how they work. What to do with them and what not to do with them. We can talk, like all the topics that we've covered today, myself and the other stewards are able to elucidate and help with the translation of it if you need it. And if you need anything having to do with integral transformative bodywork, if you want to hop in and take this adventure with us, that's the best way to do it at this point in time. This is our YouTube channel. Please remember to ring that little bell and become a subscriber. You'll have you'll get all the new information coming on about about our classes, our activities, and of course these videos that are coming up. We do these videos for free for the community. We also do appreciate donations. You can find us on PayPal, Embodying ITB on PayPal, or I believe you can also search Integral Transformative Bodywork. It should come up that way as well. PayPal us. We suggest a $10 to $15 donation for us, and every donation goes directly to ITB. It doesn't go to me. It goes directly to ITB and into whatever we're doing with ITB. You can also find me on Venmo at Jeffrey-West-6, and that'll also, all that donation still goes to Integral Transformative Bodywork and supporting what we're up to. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook. Just look for myself or look for Integral Transformative Bodywork. You should be able to find us, no problem at all. Thank you very much for joining me today. Once again, my name is Jeff Koshin West, and I'm very grateful to offer up this information to you. And I hope to see you next time, and I hope to do some work with you, and I hope this is benefiting you, and I hope we get to play in the future, okay? I wish you well. Be safe. Get plenty of rest. Be a human being. Do your shadow work. Do your meditation. And hey, let's make this world a fabulous place, shall we? All right. Deep love and gratitude. Appreciate it very much.